Hi, we see only 3 people, so we are gonna let 10 seconds waiting for others to walk in. Okay. Welcome to AAPBS Peregrine Fall webinar series. Hope people can walk in time, but let me just start. Based on feedback from participants from the last summer webinar series, we've selected topics that they want to hear more and learn more and discuss more. So we created fall webinar series, and today is the second part of the webinar 2 with the topic of AOL for international accreditations. And we're looking at the business education assessment exam solutions. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker, Alima Jamiransaran, who is the director of Asia Pacific Operations at Peregrine Global Services in Tokyo. Alima?
Great, thank you, Kayla. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're joining us, and welcome everyone. And I really would like to thank you for joining us today. And today's workshop is focused on assurance of learning for international accreditation, as Kayla kindly introduced. But today we're going to specifically focus more at a program level evaluation to measure student learning outcomes and how to assess student learning and performance. And again, my name is Alima Jamiransaran. I'm here in Tokyo, Japan. Kayla is in Seoul, Korea. And I'm Director of Asia Pacific Operations here at Peregrine Global. And I have been working as a global higher education consultant for over a decade. And I have taught, and I'm currently also teaching management and leadership courses to postgraduate students. I hope you are familiar with Peregrine, just in case you are fairly new. Then Peregrine Global Services has provided assessment solutions to higher education institutions for more than 10 years. And we currently serve more than 500 schools worldwide and have administered nearly 2 million assessments. So as Kayla mentioned, we are proud to partner with AAPBS, and we work very closely with AAPBS to help provide the management schools with resources and services to enhance quality assurance and business education. So there are multiple ways for you to participate, and we'll plan to hold this webinar somewhat interactive. So please do respond to the poll questions when they are offered. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand. You can ask your questions in person. We do plan to leave a Q&A time at the end. But if we don't get to answer your questions, we'll be happy to follow up with a written response. There's also a little gift as a token of our appreciation for you to spending this hour with us, and I'll tell you about it pretty shortly. All right, well, let's start with a quote, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. And this is something that was said famously by W. Edward Deming. Often, we're trying to manage our programs, improve quality, and enhance the student experience, but our efforts are much less effective if we do not collect objective, consistent, and reliable data. We all know data-driven decision-making, and there's a reason that data is now more important than ever. We have learned that decisions are better made based on good, solid data rather than on our intuition. So we are all, I imagine, immersed in the work of assessment and assurance of learning in one way or the other. And probably that's the reason why you are attending this webinar, right? But let's get on the same page with this common definition of assessment. So assessment is the systematic collection, review, and use of information about educational programs undertaken for the purpose of improving student learning and development. So we are talking about assessing student learning outcomes, and assessing student learning outcome, of course, constitutes one of the cornerstones of quality assurance and international accreditation frameworks. So let's look at why are learning outcomes important in higher education. We have made a promise to our students that when they complete our business programs, they will have acquired certain knowledge, competencies, and skills which they can apply to their work environments. Then how do we know we are delivering on those promises, right? And learning expectations to our students, and how do we ensure that we continue delivering on those promises? So the answer is by setting effective and measurable learning objectives and also measuring them. Now, in addition, quality assurance and accreditation agencies expect schools to put into place rigorous measurement tools to better understand the degree to which students have retained what they have learned. Measuring student learning objectives is not the end goal. Most importantly, we do it to ensure that we are constantly surveying, collecting data, and analyzing the student learning results to ensure that we are continually improving our academic programs. So to continually improving your learning environment and staying engaged with that learning process is important, and something that institutions put into place in order to maintain that, accountability and transparency, right? So here I'd like to offer my first poll question. And I wanted to find out from you whether within your business programs or institutions, do you objectively measure your learning outcomes? The first response is yes, all learning outcomes are objectively measured. Wonderful. The second response is somewhat, most of our learning outcomes are objectively measured, but there's room for improvement, right? And then the third response is no, we're currently not objectively measuring learning outcomes, but perhaps you are in the process of discussing and working it out and put a systematic process in place. So I see responses coming in, and I do want to see if we can get a good percentage of you responding. Thank you. Thank you for answering that question. And for the sake of, oh, thank you. The answers keep coming. All right. All right, so the response, let me share it with you. It's quite interesting that we are split right in half. And I'm really happy for the half that is doing well with, using hopefully, systematic processes in place to objectively measure your learning outcomes. And then another half that somewhat, but ready and hopefully to improve and expand on those processes. So thank you. Then you have come to the right webinar, of course. So we have mentioned the Deming's quote, right? So I'm sure you are quite familiar that Deming had developed the Deming's cycle of quality improvement, which includes a plan, do, check, action framework that has been used for quality assurance in many industries across the globe. Now we have adapted this framework to fit to higher education and specifically to continuous improvement of student learning. I find it provides a systematic way to review and make the most out of learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making. So we start, as you can see, with the plan step, right? And one of the most important parts of this cycle is to establish clear learning outcomes at a program level, which are not to be confused with learning outcomes on the module or a course level. We need to determine what it is that we want students to know and be able to do upon completion of an academic program, right? Now, the next stage is how to identify your objectives and benchmarks, in relevance to your learning outcomes, and then how you will put into place the different assessment instruments. Usually these go together since the tools you use to assess will often dictate the objectives and benchmarks you will set. Now, at this point in our continuous improvement cycle, we have identified outcomes, identified our objectives, and considered a process. And now we move to the collection and analysis stage, which is a part of the do stage. The next are the last two steps of the cycle, sharing results and making changes, or better known as closing the loop. So once you start, you might already have started working, or you have successfully achieved accreditation. So you might be quite familiar with this term closing the loop, quite a cliche phrase, but it does describe the process pretty accurately, right? So our objective here is to take all of the work we have put into this process and use it to uncover our strengths and weaknesses and decide if we want to address them, and if so, how. So in this webinar, we will focus today on the last stage of the Deming cycle, right? Making changes and improvements into your academic programs, and continuing this process to see if we have been able to close the loop. And to do all of that using the assessment results and the data we collect. So you will also notice that instructional content is not part of this cycle. And often we want to lead with the content, right? And then assess based on the content. But it's important that we lead with our learning outcomes and objectives as a method for improving our academic programs. So here's a kind of cute analogy, or nice analogy we wanted to share. And that is that the value of a summative assessment is that it offers evidence that illuminates a department's program strengths and weaknesses, right? Assessment data represent a flashlight, not a hammer. They shine a light on what is working well in the program and point out strengths, rather than being a blunt instrument to show where educators or students have failed. So it's kind of good, message to remember, right? Through quantitative and qualitative methods, your academic program can expand on bright spots and take corrective measure to mitigate any weaknesses. So that's the whole point of the last action stage. So I kind of wanted to review some of the basics, which I'm sure you're quite familiar, but as you know, there are two types of assessment, formative and summative, right? We all do formative pretty well. We all have taught or currently may be teaching courses. And so these are course level assessments that are an integral part of the learning process. So the formative assessment results are typically used to evaluate and also improve learning in your classroom. And we can enhance students' intrinsic motivation, their desire to learn using the formative assessment results. At the end, all of it contributes to improvements in teaching. Now, program level assessments, which are summative assessments, occur at the end of the learning process. So if it's used for accountability of the academic program to improve learning, and often it's done on a pre and post test format to demonstrate value added. And then these summative measures provide sort of evidence of integrated knowledge and retained student knowledge. Yeah, I see there's a question. Oh, thank you, Kayla. All right, so there's a question. Are there any good analysis methods for learning outcomes assessment? So we will be covering and answering your questions. So please let me know at the end of the session if you have found answers. All right, thank you for your questions. So also, an important part of summative or programmatic assessment is ensuring that you have both direct and indirect measures, right? Just to refresh your memory, you can do the direct measure of learning utilizing a comprehensive assessment tool. So we're talking about solutions, right? That could be either an embedded assessment or a standalone exam. So direct measurement results are generally used to support continuous improvement at the institution. So if you also have sort of direct measure of learning through a final project or a thesis or dissertation, so forth, make sure that it's really directly measuring, but also you have the evaluation rubrics for the knowledge retained that are relevant to knowledge. And I'll show you, there's an example of what I mean, and I'll expand it a little more in a couple slides. Now, indirect measures provide a view of student learning. For example, attitudes, perceptions, and feelings and values, right? They imply student learning by employing self-reported data and reports. So indirect measures help to substantiate instances of student learning and include surveys, interviews, course evaluations, and also you can use reports on retention, graduation, and placement, as proxies for indirect measure, right? These measures are typically used in conjunction with direct measures of student learning. So as part of, if you're using a dissertation or final presentation works as part of a direct measure, here's an example of why final grades and course grades could not be used for summative assessment of student learning. So why final grades aren't program assessment? So for example, this is a marketing course, and I have an example of two students, right? Student 1 and student 2. They both got a final grade of 81, which looks wonderful. However, we can see from the grade breakout that final grades incorporate items such as class participation. And if a final presentation was used, then the grade, there's a group presentation. Then if a final presentation is used for the final grade, then most likely it is going to include aspects like, form, function, presentation style, and delivery, all of which are not related to the actual learning. So as you can see, for measuring retained knowledge and learning outcomes, the final grades does not help you to comply with those requirements. So here's another poll question. I would like to, oh, sorry, I didn't stop sharing, but I would like to ask you two questions. So in this round, I want to know what kind of assessment instruments your program, your institution have been able to employ in order to measure your student learning outcomes. Do you have internal assessments, internal tools, or internal evaluation exams? Do you have a third-party assessment tool that you use in your program or institution? Now coming to the direct and indirect measures, because as part of your assessment process, right, you want to have a variety of tools and a variety of processes that comprise your portfolio of assessment. And so I wanted to find out if you, where you are in this regard. So if you could answer the questions, do you see them? Oh, yeah, this allows for multiple answers. So appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to, if there's more of you would like to answer, I would appreciate it. So far, the response I'm getting is you are, conducting assessments using with the internally developed and some external tools, and then you are doing pretty well with your direct measure of learning. And then in this response, I somehow didn't have any takers on indirect measure of learning. So typically, most programs are able to conduct student exit surveys, student satisfaction surveys. But if you are not doing that, we also have a solution for you to be able to deliver that at no cost to you if you're a Peregrine user, because it's just a complementary tool. And then I'll point that out once we get to that slide. All right, well, thank you for answering, for responding to that poll question. And glad to hear that you are doing quite well in that regard. All right, so this is the solution part. You're asking about what are the methods for analyzing student learning outcomes, for assessing, and also using the analysis for your decision making. So with that, Peregrine Global has designed global business education assessment service specifically to measure your student learning outcomes at a programmatic level, right? And it's called the GBE assessment exam. And as you know all too well, right? And we've mentioned it, that assessment of learning outcomes is a key requirement for both national accreditation, institutional, international, and programmatic accreditation or certification. But then there's the challenge of trying to find the right assessment tool. And then you want that tool to be flexible, to be comprehensive, and also affordable, right? And provide you some external benchmarking, some external comparison of your students' results against different aggregates of comparison. So, so we have created the GBE assessment exam service, as we call it. And our objectives have been to really provide you with that meaningful, cost-effective, practical solution for evaluating your programmatic learning outcomes. And we have created it so that you'll be able to conduct comparisons of your program's results to one or more external aggregate pools of comparison. We also offer you an opportunity to be able to analyze your program internally, and a tool that directly measures student retained knowledge. So with the use of this tool, you will be able to not only get useful and actionable data for improving your academic programs, but also meeting accreditation requirements at the same time. So the GBE assessment exam, right, provides you with a normed summative assessment solution used to internally and externally evaluate your program. Now, this customizable solution is easily managed and can be effectively integrated into your business program, also integrated into your learning management system. So we are here to measure your students' retained knowledge, and it's again designed for your programmatic evaluation and also programmatic accreditation requirements related to learning outcomes assessment, quality assurance, and external academic benchmarking. So there is a great nexus. We have mentioned accreditation quite a few times, but there's great nexus between quality and accreditation, right? So for those of you who know us, probably know that PERE works with all the major international accrediting agencies for institutional and programmatic accreditation. So almost all of the accreditors, right, displayed here require you to have identified and defined your learning objectives within the established framework of quality assurance processes involving direct measurement and sometimes indirect measures of learning resulting in programmatic evaluation. That is certainly true for AACSB in its newly approved standards. It's standard number 5 for AOL. And there, AACSB asks schools to conduct both direct and indirect measures of learning, right? And then if you're working with ACBSB, another wonderful accrediting organization based out of the US, they specifically require business programs to have direct measure of student learning, external assessment, and also comparative measure with external benchmarking. So for those of you who have worked with ACBSB, probably quite familiar and know that that is something that's required of you. So what are the key features of the assessment solution that we offer you, right? We have a PERE developed test bank of 12 business topics and management topics. And then you can create as many assessment exams as you need to that are aligned with your learning outcomes, right? By selecting from this 12 available business and management topics. You can integrate the assessment into your learning management system for seamless delivery of the assessment to your students and automated gradebook posting. We have 2 separate test banks for your undergraduate programs and graduate programs. And then you are able to benchmark your scores with institutional, with other institutions based on various demographics, such as academic degree, program delivery modality, and also regional averages, right? You can benchmark your students' results against all, the average of all schools outside of the US or average of all US programs. You can also compare your students' results against the European average, Asian average. We have South Asian average, Indian, you name it, Latin American, African, and so forth. So that's a great tool. And when you sign up to use our tool, any of our services, you get full access to your client admin site, which is available to you 24/7. And this is where you can access all your individual student results and data. This is where you are able to run all the different reports that we make available to you. So because of the safety and security measures built into the system, you are able to offer this exam without hiring a proctor. And that would, save you easily anywhere from $40 to, $100, $140, depending on your services. So GBE assessment exam is available in British English, and our test bank questions are not US centric or based on US examples. So it's truly an assessment exam that's developed for the schools outside of the US in order to measure student learning in business education. It's also available in 7 different languages, including British English, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Mongolian, French, and Russian. So we're truly measuring student knowledge of business management, right? Topics. And then so students are not taking language proficiency. And this is the reason why we're able to provide you with the wealth of external comparison data. Here's the list of the 12 global business education topics that we offer. And each topic is the bigger umbrella, category, right? It gets broken down to subject level areas. And the key here is when you run the reports are very detailed, right? They come at a topical level, subtopical level, as you can see for management. There's human resource management, operations, production management, organizational behavior, and also will be broken down by each of the subjects that make up all of these topics. As you can see, I have added topic number 13, and that's for custom topics. So if you have a subject area or a topical area at your program that is quite specific to you only, we can upload your test bank questions and offer it as your custom topic. When you do that, of course, there's no external comparison because you're the only institution that is offering that topic, but you'll be able to run internal analysis report and do some further analysis on that topic. So for example, we have a number of partner institutions that are located in India, and therefore we have 3 custom topics specific to Indian schools, and they are on, as you can see, on accounting, business finance, and Indian specific legal environment of business issues. As I mentioned, topics are composed of 4 to 8 subject areas, right? Here's an example of the business integration and strategic management topic. And it's made up of these 6 different subject areas, right? What a good thing is when you are creating your assessment tool, then you can review these subject areas and decide if there's alignment between our test bank content and your learning outcomes, right? Your curriculum. And also, if you are in the process of putting your learning outcomes together, then your subjects are essentially your learning outcomes without the verb. And in terms of the verb, I'm sure many of you use Bloom's taxonomy. And if you have attended our previous workshop, the 2-hour workshop on assurance of learning, that we have gone into a little more detail about the how to create and define your learning outcomes and how to use verbs from the Bloom's taxonomy. So with the GBE assessment tool, you can use the inbound, outbound assessment approach. So what does that mean? At the beginning of the student's academic experience, if you have a 4-year program, an incoming freshman, for example, could take what we call the inbound exam. So there you are collecting benchmark measures, where your students coming in at what level of knowledge into your program. And then when they complete your program, at the end of their program, in their last semester, perhaps before they graduate, they take the outbound exam. So that's the program level pre and post test, right? And then the difference between the inbound and outbound exam scores provides you with the value for the direct measure of learning of your program. So a lot of the times, outbound exam a must, right? You want to collect all the good data and information that your graduating students can impart with you as you can. With the inbound students, one thing, for example, your students are graduating on the outbound score of 75%. So if your students were coming at 40%, and that's the direct measure, the value added, wonderful. But if your students were coming at 10%, that's a whole another value added story. And with the direct measure, of course, you're using it to understand and gain better knowledge into your programs, into your students' learning experience and performance. But also you can share the assessment results with other stakeholders for promoting your program, also for sharing if you have good story of how much value you're bringing and how well your students are performing or improving throughout the academic experience with your institution, then that's something that you can share with your other stakeholders, for example, in your marketing promotional materials. And the partner businesses that employ your students into their companies and so forth. So there's wealth of best practices and experience we can share with you, and feel free to, keep up the conversation. I'll be happy to share those with you. And then, of course, we talked about the academic benchmarking, which is done by comparing your cumulative results with other institutions' data. All right, here's my next poll. And if you could answer the question I have for you this time. And I wanted to find out now, how well are you able to use your assessment data and results for your continuous improvement processes, right? We talked about closing the loop. So to what degree do you close the loop using learning outcomes data? And the first is, yep, you're doing really well, wonderfully. Yes, very successfully. The second response is partially, doing good job, but could improve. And the third response could be, perhaps you don't have a formal process yet, but you do have some form of assessment, but you may not have an academic curriculum committee that reviews results on a regular basis. So that could be your third response. And the fourth is not yet in place. All right, well, thank you for that response. I wanted to leave some good time for Q&A. Oh, wonderful. So, oh, wow. Okay, let me end the poll and share the result with you. So I'm glad that you are using the assessment data and results. And I see the response is partially, but doing a good job. So I'm really happy to learn that. And when you selected partially, I hope there's room for improvement. And part of academic continuous improvement experience is to continually seek how can we better ourselves, right? So thank you for that participation in my poll question. And as a token of our appreciation for coming to spend this hour with us, I would like to make some complimentary resources available to you. And one is you can download our Assurance of Learning workbook. And it's a really comprehensive, and it's a great tool if you wanted to understand more the implications and application of assurance of learning, right? Also, if you have new team members, and I was actually talking to a school in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, that just got a new dean. And being a new dean, he's fairly new to the whole quality assurance and accreditation. So this would be a great resource to share with your new deans or with your department chairs or anyone else who's involved in your quality assurance team. We also have an online learning module for the Assurance of Learning workbook. And the purpose of the course is to teach the concepts, principles, and requirements associated with assurance of learning to higher education officials seeking perhaps initial accreditation, or if you are on your reaffirmation of accreditation path, this could be a really good refresher. And I think the cost is like $395, but I'll be sending you an access to for a code for free access. This course also applies not only to quality assurance managers in higher education who desire additional information, as I mentioned, to learn more about AOL or to learn more about continuous quality improvement processes. You can use it as also a professional development opportunity for up and coming faculty at your institutions too. All right. All right, so now we have introduced you the assessment tool, the GBE assessment, its features and its functionalities. I wanted to get into the how to use the data and the results portion of it, which is the most important part, right? It's challenging to create your learning outcomes, set your objectives, and if you wanted to learn about how to define and identify your learning outcomes, and then how to formulate your objectives that need to be measurable, effective, and clear, feel free to check out our Assurance of Learning workshop, where we go into quite detail about that there. So now, once you assess your learners, the analysis stage is going to help you make sense of your data and begin to understand how to impact quality, right? The questions you're going to ask are going to be dependent on your goals, objectives, on your institution, type of program, also your program's priorities, and many other factors. Now, today we're going to cover some basic foundational questions and how you would answer them using the analysis and reports we provide you. So this is part of the PERE Green's expansive reporting capabilities. And here's a sample list of different reports that we offer you. And as we've been discussing, it's not enough to administer the assessment alone, right? The most beneficial part of assessment is to use the data and the results to gain insight into how your students are learning, insight into your curriculum, right? Identify the areas of strengths and improvement and making decisions using the data. So once you identify the gaps, you can start discussing the way to bridge gaps and remedy the shortcomings, right? These actionable results produced by our assessment tool helps you satisfy your accreditation requirements, be it national, international, like our partners AAPBS or AACSB. Also address your assurance of learning needs, as well as help you improve the quality of your academic program. So here's a question. What does the data say about students' mastery of a subject matter? In order to answer this question, we use PERE Green's internal analysis report. So this is one of the reports that was on the previous slide. The internal analysis report is going to provide you with data on your programmatic performance. It is going to be broken down by topic and subject, and then you will be able to see percent of questions students answered correctly. And let's get to the next example. So here's an example. So for example, so here you can see that one of the subjects on the exam was business finance, right? And then it's broken down into the subject level areas as we've discussed. So it is also good to mention that on our exam, students receive 10 questions for every topic, and the number of questions they receive in each of the subjects are going to vary. So a student may receive 3 questions related to tax rates, taxes, and tax code, but 0 questions related to interest and dividends, for example, right? But that's okay, and you will see why. With this, so you can drill down with this table, you can drill down on what specifically your students are excelling at or struggling with in terms of subject matters, right? You will also see the number of questions offered on a particular subject and the percent of questions answered correctly. So therefore, if a student only is offered one question related to assess, evaluation, and inventory and got that wrong, it's not enough data to determine that that area is an area of needed improvement for the individual student, right? However, if you look at the results cumulatively and see that students underperformed in that subject when 4,000 questions in the subject were offered, then you have more of a substantial information to make a judgment on. The report also provides a percentile rank so that you can see how your students collectively compare to other students within the aggregate. So the aggregate could be, as I mentioned, an average for all the schools, business programs, MBA programs, for example, located outside of the US or in Asia. We are Asia in terms of our region, or Southeast Asia, India, and so forth. So it is by organizing your data down this way that you can easily answer this question: what does the data say about learners' mastery of subject matter? So there's a next question: how do your students' performance compare to programs in schools like us, right? So we're talking about external benchmarking. So it is good to understand where your learners score well and where they struggle, but it puts it into perspective when you can compare those results against the results of other schools. To have access to that type of data, you will likely need to adopt an assessment service that allows you to benchmark, right? And that's quite difficult to do with an assessment that is developed in-house. I've seen a number of you who are using internally developed assessment tools. And it's also difficult to have these comparisons when the assessment even if it's externally developed, you're using is not nationally normed or regionally normed because other institutions are not using it. So because PERE serves, as I mentioned, more than 500 institutions across the globe and has administered nearly 2 million exams, we have the data available for benchmarking. So our partner institutions are able to address this question using the external comparison report. The report allows them to choose up to 5 external benchmarks. For example, you can compare your students' results against schools based on geography, as I've mentioned, institution type, including private, public, or academic delivery modality. And that refers to an entirely online program or hybrid or traditional, which is face-to-face kind of program. So what is really cool about our reporting feature is that there are several aggregate reports that will provide you with real-time look at the size of the data, so the number of exams and institutions within each aggregate that you are benchmarking against. So I've noticed that, in that question, no one said that they are using indirect measure of learning, right? So this sort of pertains to that question, which is for the institutions, it's quite important, right? That they demonstrate that they provide value to students and stakeholders. Now the question, what is your learner's perception of the value of your program, is then quite essential. And with this question, it is important to analyze both qualitative and quantitative measures, right? So this would include analyzing the student survey results that ask questions related to program value, as well as comparing students' knowledge growth over the course of the program. So if you assess your students at the beginning of the program, and then again at the end of the program, you can use a pairwise report to easily measure knowledge development over time. So with the combined data, you can demonstrate the value of your program to stakeholders, including accreditors, alumni, prospective students, and so forth. Also, with the external analysis report that we saw earlier, you can compare your student growth via percentage change against different aggregates if you do an inbound and outbound. So testing at the beginning and at the end of the program. So, with our assessment, you are getting that direct measure, right? Measuring students' retained knowledge. Again, with pre and post, and then it's wonderful. And you are able to externally benchmark. But coming back to the indirect measure, you can offer the complimentary, this free service that comes with assessment that we offer you. You can create a student exit survey. And you can have the questions in it that help you gather the indirect measure of learning, right? What is the student's perception? What do students think about their learning experience? So with this one tool, you will be able to gather the direct measure, indirect measure, comparative measure, and of course, this is an external assessment. So reach out to us if you wanted to learn more about how to utilize this feature in the service. So here's the next question. What were the results of changes made to the program? Is there a correlation between program change and assessment data trends? So essentially, we are talking about the closing the loop, right, concept. So although generally changes made to a program produce a positive result, that cannot be assumed. After you make a change, you will need to measure the impact. A great way to do that is to complete a longitudinal analysis, which will show you how your changes have impacted results over time. So here's an example of such a report, and you can select up to 4 exam periods. So this is your trend analysis report, right? What longitudinal analysis allows you to do is see clearly how we have impacted the quality of education. So I think it's also important to note that programmatic assessment is meant to measure the entire program and not meant to put faculty under a magnifying glass, right? A lot of the times we see hesitancy by faculty to embrace the assessment because they think they're going to be judged or graded or evaluated on their performance depending on how their students fare in the exam. But by measuring the integrated knowledge of your learners at the program level, you can move to make improvements to the program, including adding courses, adding projects, changing sequence of courses, and so forth. So these types of changes could lead to significant improvements for your students. And then, so this will be the good table, good report to demonstrate, the success of changes you have made, or maybe unintended consequences of changes you have made into your curriculum. I always like to mention that when you have your data, first of all, make sure you have a really good sample. Make sure you have trends established. These are not flukes. So these trends have been showing up from testing period to another testing period. And then make sure that the areas you're looking at, right, are actually areas of your focus, areas of your priority. So if your program is, for example, known to be strong in accounting, and that's sort of your core niche. And then if your students are not performing well on certain accounting indicators, you really want to zoom in, right? You really wanted to understand and analyze. But if your students are not performing maybe not as well, say on, I'm just going to pick anything like global dimensions of business, which is quite essential in this day and age, but it's not the focus of your program, then you're going to look at it through different lens than your accounting topics, right? So this is a really good report, the longitudinal analysis report. And if you are working with ACBSP for initial accreditation or reaffirmation, then they ask you to have at least 3 data points, right? They ask you to make sure that you have a process in place and you have been tracking and you have been closing the loop with your results and data. And then so once you have reviewed and analyzed your data, it's quite important, according to the Deming cycle of improvement, quality improvement, you share the results, right? So make sure you share your results with your faculty, with your students as well, and with all your other stakeholders, and certainly for your decision making, and get as many people involved as possible. So after you have reviewed the internal analysis report, after you have externally benchmarked your students against all international school average or all Asian school, European school average, and see where you are, you benchmark, maybe you set some goals and objectives to be within 5% of, say, private schools in the Asian average or European average or public schools, depending on what your type of institution is. Then one other report that we offer you and no one else offers is called Response Distractor Report. It's really unique to PERE as we are the only provider that offers you this solution. So what it does is it helps you to identify the gaps, right? So far, as I mentioned, you have looked, you analyzed, you understand why you see what you see, and you have identified certain areas that maybe you need to make some changes. Maybe you have discussed what kind of changes you wanted to make, and then come to this report. So what we did is we took our test bank. So this is multiple choice exam, right? There's one correct response, and there's typically 4 incorrect responses to a question. So for each of the incorrect responses, we coded it to one of the 5 types of response distractors. And they are fact-based error, concept-based error, conclusion-based error, interpretation-based error, and calculation-based error. So in this report, we of course display your students' results. And then the next set of reports, the tables, we compare your students' results against the test bank sample. And then we also compare your students' results against the sample of your comparative pool, right? Whichever comparative pool you decide. And then we want to see, are your students answering questions incorrectly due to one of these types of response distractors at a higher frequency compared to the test bank, compared to the comparative school average or the comparative aggregate pool average. So if your students are answering questions incorrectly at a higher frequency, positive or negative, and statistically significant, those results are, then we highlight those cells. So how do you use it in real life, right? So for example, see if I can see it, but on accounting, assume that, actually, I'm not sure which way the green or yellow is. Assume, so accounting, right? Data analysis. Your students are making errors at a higher frequency than the test bank sample due to calculation-based error, right? So, okay, that's the gap identified. How do you come up with a mitigation step? Perhaps your accounting students need a refresher course, or maybe a few review sessions, math for accounting students to brush up on their calculation skills and abilities so they'll perform better. Another example could be somehow your students might be making higher percentage of errors due to interpretation-based mistakes, right? So there's a financial statement analysis, and the interpretation-based error is statistically significant, and they're making more errors due to that. Also could be similar to concept-based error. Then again, after having identified this is area of interest and focus of your program, how can you make improvements? One of the ways, and I know I've talked to some of the business schools, they have switched textbooks. I know some of the schools have worked with faculty and shifted them around, and maybe, especially if it's a higher level accounting, then have more of an experienced instructor to teach that course. You can also look at your curriculum and see, can you add some content to help students with the critical thinking? But then usually, we only have so many weeks, we only have so many contact hours with our students, so we are more restricted in our syllabus. So maybe can you add some extra assignments, some group activities where students get to practice more their critical thinking abilities, right? Where students get more exposure to, understand deeper the concepts and develop their this is interpretation, is to get deeper and understand and comprehend better the concepts and also right and wrong responses. So it's a really nifty, cool tool that helps you identify not only the knowledge gaps in your students' learning, but also helps you to come up and hint at the ways to mitigate any of the shortcomings. So here's another sort of mini study that we conducted at PERE. And there we wanted to see if there was a trend with schools who used our assessment for at least 6 years consecutively. And so we analyzed the data from 7 schools that were selected for the bachelor's level evaluation. And we were sure to encompass multiple groups of students and to increase the sample size to make sure that we really get some good, robust data. And if you look at the graphs, you see that there's a positive trend in scores over time for the schools that have used PERE assessment and their students' learning, right? For the master's level, we selected 2 schools over a 6-year period, again, showing a positive trend on the graph. And this suggests that schools are using the assessment results to make changes in the programs and, most importantly, improve the quality of business education. So that's a really great story that we are happy to share with you. So in summary, to the Global Business Education Assessment Exam Solution and the service, we are able to provide you with the cost-effective, as we set out, and a practical solution to the evaluation of programmatic learning outcomes, right? But most importantly, provide you with actionable data, analytics, and metrics that you can use for improving your academic programs, right? Delivery of knowledge to your students. Now, using PERE's assessment service, program managers can map the learning outcomes to the exam topics and subjects, set targets and objectives, externally benchmark, and integrate student surveys, now evaluate results and report progress relative to knowledge-based and critical also thinking learning outcomes. And then with the use of GBE, most importantly, again, you are able to use the information for your academic decision-making and improving the quality of your program. And also development, right? Measurement and analysis of learning outcomes are integral into providing high quality programs at our institutions. And I hope that with the GBE assessment tool, with the expansive reporting capability it comes with, we'll be able to help you make the most out of learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making. So here's my last poll question. If you could let me know, how can we help you, right? What can we do for you? What do you need from us? So as I mentioned, I'll be happy to provide you with the guest access to the Assurance of Learning workbook, also online learning module of the Assurance of Learning. If you wanted to have access to the GBE assessment exam, let me know. I'll happily share that with you. But if you're coming from an institution, I see some of you are, that is already using our assessment tool, thank you. Wonderful. And then if you wanted to stay on our mailing list, To learn more about upcoming solutions, please let me know. And if you are representing a school that is currently a PERE Green client institution, as a faculty, you have free access to all of our live exams. So please do let us know, and we'll be happy to actually provide you the real assessment that your students are taking. And if you are teaching a course where your students are taking the assessment exam, I hope you have been able to do that as well. Well, thank you for responding to my poll question, and I will end the poll right now. And then with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to participate and spending this hour with myself and Kayla. Kayla, did you have anything to share with the group?
Thank you. Thank you for joining our session. And before we end the session, I want to remind you that we have next webinar coming in December. Because we understand there are a lot of webinars and seminars and conferences online. So we'll let you participate in those and focus on those. And we'll come back in December 2nd and 3rd with assessing and developing workplace readiness skills, the skill sets. So don't forget to register if you haven't. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in December.
Great, thank you, and look forward to catching up again in December. Feel free to share. I'll send you the video recording, and then if you want PDF file of the presentation slides, I'll be happy to share it with you. And AAPBS conference, accreditation conference, is coming up in November also. So hope to see you register at the conference and participate there.
Yeah, this one is free of charge for members and non-members because it's 100% online. It will be 11th and 12th of November and hosted by Chiang Mai University, Thailand. So aapbs.org, you could register and see speakers and programs and schedule and all that.
Okay, well, thank you, Kayla, and thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, bye.